She grabbed the plate of salmon and dumped it right on the head of one of New York's most feared women. The restaurant went dead silent. Sauce dripped down Eleanor Blackwood's diamond necklace. Fish clung to her ruined Chanel dress. No one moved. No one breathed. Because everyone knew what happens to people who cross the Blackwood family. But Grace Mitchell did not run. She untied her apron, folded it carefully, and walked out with her head held high. What she did not know was that a man in the shadows had recorded everything. Within hours, that video would reach Nathaniel Blackwood himself, the most powerful and dangerous man in Manhattan. And his reaction? It would shock everyone, including his own mother. In the next 48 hours, Grace would lose everything: her job, her reputation, and nearly her 14-year-old brother. But she would also discover that sometimes, the moment you stop bowing to power is the moment your real life begins. This is the story of a waitress who chose dignity over survival and found something she never expected: love. This story will teach you that your self-worth cannot be bought, that standing up for yourself can change your entire destiny, and that even your greatest enemy can become your greatest blessing. Stay until the end, because Grace's transformation will inspire your own. For 7 years, Grace Mitchell was a flawless waitress at the Monarch, a top Manhattan restaurant. She had never received one complaint. At 27, she knew the place inside and out. But Grace carried invisible scars. Her parents had died 3 years ago, leaving her with crushing medical debt. Now she was raising her 14-year-old brother Noah all by herself. Every single tip went to his private school scholarship. Then, a Thursday night gala changed everything. Eleanor Blackwood, mother of the feared Nathaniel Blackwood, entered with her friends. The Blackwood name meant power, the kind people only whispered about. Eleanor started her attack immediately. "This silverware is wrong," she declared, "and we have waited 5 minutes for bread." Grace approached, her smile practiced and perfect. "Good evening, madam. I am sorry for your wait." She offered a basket of warm bread. Eleanor inspected a piece with disgust. "It is as hard as a rock." Her friends chuckled nervously, embarrassed by her behavior. Grace kept her composure. "I can bring you another selection if you like." "No need," Eleanor said, shoving the basket away. "My appetite is ruined." Grace felt the eyes of other diners on her. This was not just a difficult customer. This was something else. Eleanor found fault in everything. The soup was too salty. The wine was not the right temperature. The forks had stains only she could see. Her voice grew louder with each complaint. "This waitress is clearly not trained," she announced to her friends. "I am surprised she still works here." Humiliation burned in Grace's cheeks, but she said nothing. She had to keep this job. The situation exploded when Eleanor poured red wine on her own white Chanel dress. "Look what you did!" she screamed, pointing at Grace. "You clumsy fool!" Grace stood firm. "Madam, I was on the other side of the table. I did not touch you. How dare you call me a liar?" Eleanor stood up, creating a scene. The dining room fell quiet. Richard Porter, the manager, rushed to the table, his face tight with stress. He knew the Blackwood family was not to be crossed. "Mrs. Blackwood, please calm down," he begged. Then he turned to Grace, his voice shaking. "Apologize to her, now." Grace stared at him, stunned. 7 years of perfect service, and he wanted her to lie. "Mr. Porter, I did nothing wrong. She spilled the wine herself." "Grace," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Apologize, or you are fired." Eleanor crossed her arms, a victorious smile on her face. This was what she wanted. "I am waiting," she said, tapping her foot. "A public apology for your incompetence." At that moment, something inside Grace broke. It was not the shame, it was the injustice. She had given 7 years to this place, only to be thrown away for a cruel, powerful woman. She looked at Eleanor's dinner, a plate of grilled salmon. "You want an apology?" Grace asked, picking up the plate. "Here is my apology." Then she emptied the entire plate over Eleanor Blackwood's head. Sauce dripped down Eleanor's perfect hair. Pieces of salmon clung to her diamond necklace. The restaurant was frozen in absolute silence. No one had ever challenged the Blackwoods. Everyone knew there would be a price to pay. If you are enjoying this story, please tap the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue. What Grace did not know was that Nathaniel Blackwood would soon see this, and he would not react as anyone expected. Eleanor finally erupted. Her scream cut through the quiet like lightning. "How dare you!" she howled, sauce running down her face. "I will ruin you. I will sue you until you have nothing left. Do you know who I am?" She turned on the manager. "Call the police right now. I want her arrested. You will all pay for this." Richard Porter stood trembling, unable to speak. Eleanor's friends tried to clean her off, but she slapped their hands away. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, her eyes fixed on Grace. But Grace felt a strange sense of peace. She slowly untied her apron, the one she had worn for 7 years. She folded it with care and placed it on a table. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you can sue me. You can destroy my career. You can use all your power against me, but you cannot take my dignity. I would rather lose my job than apologize for something I did not do." She looked at her boss. "Mr. Porter, thank you for the 7 years. I cannot work for a place that protects bullies." Then Grace turned and walked away. Her head was high, her steps were steady. She did not run. Each step was a quiet statement of her self-respect. The guests watched in silence, some with admiration, others with fear for her future. In a dark corner of the restaurant, a man had seen it all. Marcus Chen, Nathaniel Blackwood's right-hand man, was there to watch over his boss's mother. Nathaniel knew his mother caused trouble. But tonight, Marcus saw something he had never witnessed in 10 years of service. A woman with nothing had just challenged Eleanor Blackwood and won. She had no money and no power, but she walked out of that restaurant like a queen. From his table, Marcus quietly lowered his phone. He had recorded everything. He sent the video to Nathaniel with a simple message: "You need to see this." He then left cash on the table and walked out, heading away from the woman named Grace. Behind him, Eleanor was still screaming threats, but Marcus knew her anger was not important. What mattered was the look in Grace's eyes. It was a look without fear, a fire he had never seen in anyone who faced that family. The moment Grace stepped outside, the cold November wind hit her. All the strength she had shown inside vanished. Her legs began to tremble. She had to grab a light pole to keep from falling. The adrenaline was gone, leaving her feeling hollow and dizzy. What did I just do? She had poured food on the mother of one of New York's most powerful men. She had just destroyed 7 years of her career. Her hand was shaking as she pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen showed a picture of Noah, her brother, in his school uniform. His smile felt like a knife in her heart. She dialed his number. He answered after 3 rings. "Grace, why are you calling? Are you done with work already?" His voice was full of surprise. Grace bit her lip to stop a sob from escaping. "Noah, something happened. I am coming home early. I will explain when I get there." There was a pause. Noah's voice grew tight with worry. "Are you okay? You sound strange." "I am fine," Grace lied. Her voice felt fake. "I am just tired. I will be home soon." She hung up before he could ask anything else. One more word from him and she would have broken down right there on the street. Grace walked to the bus stop. Every step felt heavy. She sat on the cold bench, watching the city move on as if her world had not just ended. 7 years of hard work. 7 years of long nights and difficult people. It was all gone, turned to smoke over a single plate of salmon. The bus arrived. Grace got on the bus like a robot. She found a seat in the back and stared out the window. The city lights blurred as the numbers started adding up in her mind. Rent for their Brooklyn apartment was due. The utility bills were late. She still owed over $50,000 for her mother's medical care. Noah's school cost nearly $1,000 a month, even with a scholarship. And now, she had no job. Even worse, she had made an enemy of the Blackwood family. Rumor was they could make people disappear. Who would ever hire her now? The story would spread quickly. No restaurant wanted an employee who threw food on a customer, especially not Eleanor Blackwood. Grace felt her throat tighten. She fought for her dignity, but what was the cost? What would happen to Noah? He was only 14. He wanted to be a doctor. She had promised their dying mother she would take care of him. Tears streamed down her face. Was she selfish? Did she put her pride before her brother's future? But then she remembered Eleanor's smug look. She remembered the demand to kneel. She knew she would do it all over again. Some things you cannot sell. Dignity was one of them. The bus reached her stop. Grace stepped off into the cold Brooklyn air. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She did not know how she would pay the bills, but she knew she had to face Noah and tell him everything. That felt like the hardest part of all. She opened the door to their small apartment. The smell of Noah's favorite vanilla candle filled the air. He was at his desk, but had clearly not been studying. He jumped up the second he saw her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "What happened? Did someone hurt you?" Grace looked at her brother. He was 14 and almost her height. His face was still young, but his eyes were old with loss. She hung her coat on a hook and sat on their old couch. She patted the seat next to her. "Come sit down," Grace said gently. "I will tell you what happened." Noah sat beside her, tense and waiting. Grace took a slow breath and began her story. She told him about Eleanor Blackwood's attitude, the constant insults, and the wine Eleanor poured on her own dress just to blame her. Grace explained what happened. She told him how Richard Porter insisted she apologize and about the impossible choice between her job and her dignity. She described pouring the salmon over the powerful woman's head. When she finished, the room was quiet. Noah's lips were pressed into a thin line, his eyes growing dark in a familiar way. It was how he looked when he was trying to hide his anger or fear. "You lost your job," Noah said. It was not a question. "Yes," Grace confirmed. "How will we live?" Noah's voice shook. "Next month's rent, my tuition, the hospital debt." Grace's heart ached hearing him list burdens a 14-year-old should never carry. "I will find another job," she said, forcing hope into her voice. "I have 7 years of experience. Someone will hire me." "But you angered the Blackwoods," Noah stated plainly. "Everyone knows them. No one will touch someone they hate." Grace had no answer. He was right. But then Noah did something completely unexpected. He looked directly at her, and his eyes held no blame, only a fierce light. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice so steady it startled her. "She had no right to treat you that way. Nobody can make you kneel for something you did not do." "Noah," Grace began, but he stopped her. "Remember what Mom said?" Noah asked. "You can lose money and earn it back. But once you lose your self-respect, it is gone forever." "You can be poor," he said, "but you cannot be a coward." Hearing him speak their mother's words brought tears to Grace's eyes. She remembered her mother in the hospital bed, thin from treatment, still telling them to live with decency and hold their heads high. "I am scared I was selfish," Grace whispered. "I am scared you will suffer because of my pride." Noah shook his head firmly. "I would rather quit school than let you be humiliated," he said, his voice cracking. "I would eat instant noodles every day. I would do anything before watching you bow to someone like her. For 3 years you have raised me. You sacrificed everything. I am proud of you. I am proud my sister is not someone who submits to injustice." Grace could not hold it in any longer. She pulled her brother into a tight hug, afraid he might vanish. Noah hugged her back, his shoulders trembling. He was crying too. They sat in their tiny apartment, holding on to each other under the Manhattan night sky. They had no money, no power, and no one to back them, but they had each other. In that moment, Grace knew it was all she needed. "We are going to be okay," she whispered. "I believe you," he said. "If the whole world abandons us, we will still have each other." That night, they slept on the small sofa, just as they had after their mother passed away. Morning light cut through the worn curtains, pulling Grace from a troubled sleep. Noah was still beside her, his breathing steady. Grace slipped out from under his arm, went to make coffee, and tried to ignore the reality that was waiting for her. Her phone buzzed loudly. The screen showed the name Diane, her closest friend from the Monarch. Grace answered. "Grace, are you on social media right now?" Diane's voice was breathless. "You have to look. Your video is everywhere." "What video?" Grace asked, her heart beginning to pound. "Last night's video," Diane nearly yelled. "Someone recorded the whole thing. It has gone viral. Millions of views. The Brave Girl hashtag is trending #1. Grace almost dropped her phone. She opened the app and stared in disbelief. The video of her and Eleanor Blackwood had more than 5 million views. Comments flooded in like a waterfall. Messages from strangers poured into her inbox. "You are a hero," one person wrote. Finally, someone stood up to the arrogant rich. "I would do the same thing," another commented, but not everyone was on her side. "She is unprofessional," one account posted. "A server has no right to act that way. She deserved to be fired." "She will never work in this industry again," another person sneered. The public split into two camps, arguing under every post. Those who supported Grace called her a symbol against class injustice. Those against her said she had destroyed her career in a moment of foolish impulse. But everyone agreed on one thing: this girl had serious nerve. Grace scrolled further and her heart stopped when she saw comments mentioning the Blackwood name. "She is done for," someone wrote. "Does she know who the Blackwoods are?" "She touched Nathaniel Blackwood's mother," another posted with a skull emoji. The story was not just online. In VIP rooms and closed-door meetings, the tale of the waitress who challenged the Blackwoods was spreading like a legend. "Did you hear?" a casino boss asked his partner. "Some girl dumped a plate of food on Eleanor Blackwood in front of 100 people." "That is crazy," his partner replied. "Does she not know what her son is capable of?" Some people bet she would disappear within a week. Others bet the Blackwood family would make an example of her. But everyone agreed that for the first time in decades, someone had dared to publicly humiliate a member of the city's most powerful dynasty. Grace sat on her cheap kitchen chair, staring at the phone like it belonged to someone else. She did not want fame or to be the center of an internet war. She only wanted to be treated with dignity. But it was too late. The whole world knew her name, and more importantly, the Blackwoods knew it too. Noah woke up, rubbing his eyes. "What are you watching?" he asked. Grace did not know how to answer. She did not know that across the city, in a penthouse at the top of Blackwood Tower, a man was watching the same video over and over, his expression unreadable. The penthouse looked down on Manhattan like a king surveying his kingdom. Nathaniel Blackwood stood before the glass wall with a cup of black coffee. At only 36, he controlled the empire his father built. In the legitimate world, he was a brilliant businessman, but in the underworld, his name made the toughest men lower their heads. He was nothing like his father. He did not use violence to show his strength. He preferred silence, careful planning, and patience. His enemies were often finished before they even knew they were in a fight. A knock came at the door. Nathaniel did not have to turn. "Come in, Marcus," he said. His voice was calm and steady. Marcus Chen entered, his dark suit perfectly tailored. He had worked for Nathaniel for over 10 years. "Boss, I have something for you," Marcus said. He placed his phone on the table. "I sent you this video last night." Nathaniel finally turned, raising an eyebrow. "What video?" "About your mother," Marcus answered. "There was an incident at the Monarch." Nathaniel put down his coffee and picked up the phone. He pressed play. The room went silent. He watched the entire video without a word, his face showing no emotion. When it ended, he started it over. He watched it again and again. Marcus stood by, hiding his surprise. He had expected anger. He had expected orders to find the waitress and ruin her. But nothing like that happened. On the fifth time through, Nathaniel paused the video. He zoomed in on Grace's face, right before she picked up the plate. He stared at her eyes. They held no trace of fear. "What do you see in her eyes?" Marcus broke the silence. Nathaniel did not answer. He watched the screen. He saw a stranger challenge his mother, his family, and the world's idea of power. Then Nathaniel did something Marcus had never seen. He smiled. It was not a cold smile for an enemy. It was not a polite smile for a partner. This smile was real. Amusement and admiration touched his lips. "She is not afraid," Nathaniel said. His voice was different. "My mother is threatening her. The manager wants to fire her. The entire restaurant is staring. But she is not afraid. She knows who we are, but she stands tall for what is right." Marcus agreed. "She is either brave or crazy," Nathaniel decided. He liked that. He liked people who did not bend. All his life, people kneeled before the Blackwood family. Powerful men bowed their heads. He was used to their fear and their lies. He hated the weakness. But this girl, a waitress with nothing, did what they never dared. Nathaniel put the phone down. "I want to know everything about her," he told Marcus. "Name, home, family, everything." Marcus nodded. "But why? What will you do?" Nathaniel looked down at the city. "I do not know yet," he said. "But a person who can face the Blackwood family without shaking is someone I want to meet. She is unlike anyone else. That makes me interested." Marcus left. Nathaniel was alone in the giant apartment. He played the video again. He watched Grace walk out of the restaurant with her head held high. She was calm in the middle of a storm. He could not look away. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Blackwood felt something move in his cold heart. An hour later, his phone rang. The screen showed the word "Mother." He knew the call would be difficult. "Nathaniel," he answered. Eleanor's voice was like a blade. "Have you seen the video? Have you seen what that girl did?" "I have seen it," Nathaniel answered calmly. "Then do something," she screamed. "Find her. Ruin her. I want her to beg for my forgiveness. She must learn what happens when you touch the Blackwood family." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "Are you listening to me, Nathaniel?" he heard her ask. "I am," he said, "and my answer is no." The line went silent. Then Eleanor's voice returned, low and dangerous. "What did you say?" "I said no, Mother," Nathaniel repeated. His tone was steady. "I will not ruin her. You are defending the woman who humiliated me. Have you lost your mind, Nathaniel? That video is everywhere, and our family name is being dragged through the mud. You have to do something. Our family's reputation or yours?" Nathaniel countered. "Because that video shows you started it. You harassed her. You spilled wine on your own gown and blamed her for it. Then you demanded she kneel for a crime you invented. How dare you, Nathaniel Blackwood?" Eleanor's voice shook with fury. "I am only speaking the truth, Mother. You went too far. I have ignored your cruelty to servers for years. I have looked away when you belittled people, but not this time. That girl did nothing wrong. She was defending her dignity." "Dignity?" Eleanor scoffed. "A poor waitress has no dignity to speak of." "She is a human being." Nathaniel's voice grew colder. "And you have forgotten that. You have lived with so much power you no longer see the people who serve you as human. They are not objects for your amusement. You are choosing a waitress over your mother," she screamed. "I am choosing what is right over what is wrong," he replied. "And that is your problem, not mine." "Fine." Eleanor's tone became a threat. "If you refuse, I will handle it myself. My connections are enough to destroy that girl's life. She will learn what happens when someone angers a Blackwood." "You will do nothing." Nathaniel's voice turned to ice. "This is not a request, Mother. It is an order. Do not touch her. Do not touch her family. If you disobey me, you will answer to me as the head of this family, not as your son." The silence that followed was suffocating. In his 36 years, Nathaniel had never threatened his mother. Something between them had just broken forever. "You will regret this," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. He hung up, standing alone in his silent penthouse. He had just protected a stranger over his own family. He felt no regret. The next 3 days felt like an eternity for Grace. She visited 17 restaurants across the city. The story was always the same. Managers were impressed with her 7 years of experience. They seemed ready to hire her instantly. But then came the question of her name. The moment she said Grace Mitchell, everything changed. Their smiles faded. Polite rejections followed. "We will call you," they would say, but she knew they never would. "The position is filled," they would lie, as the hiring sign hung in the window. It was the 17th restaurant that finally gave her the truth. The manager spoke softly. "Miss Mitchell, no one will hire you. Your name is on a blacklist. Everyone knows what happened with Mrs. Blackwood. That family can ruin any business with a single call. I have children to feed. I cannot take that risk." Grace walked out of the diner, her legs feeling like lead. Noah had warned her this would happen, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a punch to the stomach. At home, she looked at her bank account. This month's rent was covered, but next month was uncertain. Utility bills were due. A medical payment was coming. Noah's tuition had to be paid in 4 weeks. She had enough money for 6 weeks, if she cut back on everything. But what would happen after that? Noah saw the worry she tried to hide. He saw her leaving for interviews at 5 in the morning and returning with tired eyes. He saw her staring at bills late at night. He did not ask questions. Instead, he started eating less for breakfast. He claimed his school offered a free lunch. He turned his lights off early to save power. He also began searching online for part-time jobs, knowing Grace would disapprove. On the 3rd night, Grace sat alone in the dark. Their small apartment was the only home she and Noah had left. It was not much, but it held all their memories. Now she was thinking of selling it. The money would pay off their debts and cover rent for a while. It would keep Noah in school. But it meant losing the last piece of their parents. Grace put her head on the table, her body shaking from pure exhaustion. She had fought for her dignity. Now it might cost her everything. On the morning of the 4th day, Grace left her apartment with a new plan. She would look for work in New Jersey, somewhere the Blackwood name might not reach. As she locked the door, she froze. A gleaming black Maybach was parked in front of her building. It looked completely out of place in her neighborhood. The car was worth $500,000, 10 times the value of her home. Grace's heart pounded when the door opened. A man in a perfect black suit stepped out. She knew him from pictures online. It was Marcus Chen, Nathaniel Blackwood's most trusted man. Rumors said he once made an entire gang disappear overnight. Grace backed away, her body hitting the door. They had come for revenge. She prayed Noah would stay inside. "Miss Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I am not here to cause you harm." Grace stayed silent, searching for an escape she knew did not exist. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his suit. Grace held her breath. But he did not pull out a weapon. The man held out a small black card with gold letters. "Nathaniel Blackwood wants to meet you." Grace looked at it like it was a viper. "For what?" she shot back, her voice raw. "To threaten me face to face this time?" Marcus simply said no. "Mr. Blackwood just wants to talk." Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Talk? After I dumped a meal on his mother? You must think I am a fool." Marcus remained perfectly calm. "Miss Mitchell, if he wanted to harm you, he would not send me with a card. You know the Blackwood name closes doors in this city. You have seen that for the last 3 days." Grace flinched. They knew. They had been watching her entire pointless job search. "Then what is this?" she demanded. "I do not know," Marcus said. "He only told me to invite you. You can say no." Grace searched his eyes for a lie but found only cold professionalism. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then I will go," Marcus added. "I have worked for the family for over 10 years. This is the first time he has asked me to personally invite anyone. You have made him curious." Nathaniel Blackwood's curiosity was a rare thing. Grace accepted the card, her fingers shaking. The address was Blackwood Tower. She had seen it 1,000 times but never thought she would go inside. "When?" she asked. "Now, if you wish," Marcus said, motioning to the car. Grace thought of her sleeping brother and the bills on her table. She had already lost everything. What was one more risk? "Fine," she said. "I need 5 minutes to text my brother." The car moved silently through the city, taking her from her world into his. Grace watched the buildings pass, wondering if this was a mistake. When they arrived, she had to crane her neck to see the top of the tower. 72 floors of glass and steel reached for the sky. It was a monument to their power. Inside, Marcus led her across a polished marble lobby. A private elevator shot them to the top floor. The doors opened to another world. The penthouse was enormous, with glass walls showing the entire city below. The air felt heavy with intimidation. "Wait here," Marcus said, before leaving through a large door. Grace stood alone, feeling small and exposed. She did not dare to sit or touch anything. Her heart pounded in her chest. Then she heard footsteps. Nathaniel Blackwood emerged, and she instantly understood the fear he commanded. It was not his height or his hard features. It was his eyes. They were gray and cold, like a winter storm. They looked straight through her. Those were the eyes of a man who was moved by nothing. "Miss Mitchell," Nathaniel said, his voice low and smooth. "Thank you for coming." Grace steadied herself. "I had very little choice, Mr. Blackwood." "You always have a choice," he replied. "This was an invitation." "Why am I here?" Grace asked directly. "So you can tell me my life is over?" He turned to the window, looking down on the city. "I watched the video," he said. "I do not understand why you did it. You knew who my mother was. You knew what would happen to your career, yet you did it anyway. Why?" Strangely, Grace felt no fear. She had nothing left to lose. "Because I am a person, not a doormat," she said, her voice strong. "Your mother's power does not give her the right to humiliate me. My dignity is not for sale." The room went still. Nathaniel did not move, his eyes locked on Grace. But something in his gaze began to shift, like a crack forming in thick ice. After a long silence, he spoke. He said that in his life, he had met thousands of powerful people, politicians and businessmen who all bowed to his family. They would sell their souls for an advantage. But you, he said, a waitress, dared to look him in the eye and say no. You traded everything to keep your self-respect. He paused, then did something that shocked her. He smiled. It was not a cold or mocking smile. It was real, and it made his sharp face seem younger, more human. "And that makes me curious about you, Miss Mitchell. Very curious." The smile vanished. He walked to a dark oak desk and placed a file in front of her. "I have an offer for you," he said. Grace looked at the file with suspicion. "What kind of offer?" "Do you know the Sterling?" he asked. Grace nodded. Everyone in her world knew the Sterling. A 5-star restaurant inside the Blackwood Grand Hotel where one dinner cost a month of her old salary. "The manager there just resigned," Nathaniel said. "I need a replacement. I want it to be you." Grace was certain she had heard him wrong. She tried to speak, but no words came out. He was offering her the top job at one of New York's best restaurants. "Are you joking?" she finally asked. "I do not joke," Nathaniel said. "Especially about business." "But why?" Grace's voice was filled with doubt. "I humiliated your mother. That video is everywhere. I am blacklisted. It makes no sense." Nathaniel watched her before answering. "You have 7 years of experience and a perfect record. No complaints. And you have something I rarely find in a manager." "What is that?" "A spine," he said. You stand up for what is right, even when it costs you. I need someone who will not bow to rich customers, someone who values principles over money. The Sterling needs that. Grace was still skeptical. What about your mother? She will never agree. My mother does not decide who I hire. Nathaniel's voice turned cold when he mentioned Eleanor. This is my company. Grace looked down and opened the file. The salary made her gasp. It was 5 times what she earned before. Enough to pay off the medical debt in 2 years. Enough for Noah to stay in school without worry. But she knew nothing was free, especially not from a man like him. What do you want from me? She asked, meeting his gaze. What is the real price? Do you want me to launder money? Cover up illegal deals? Nathaniel did not seem offended. Instead, he studied her again. You really are not afraid of anything, are you? He said. It was a statement, not a question. I have lost too much to fear losing more, Grace answered. But I will not sell my soul. I would rather stay blacklisted. If that is a problem, you have the wrong person. Nathaniel was quiet, then he nodded slowly. Good, he said. Here is the deal. You will run the Sterling like a normal restaurant. Your only job is to make it the best. No illegal activity, nothing hidden. And my conditions, Grace said. I will not violate my conscience. I will protect my staff. If you ask me to do something wrong, I will refuse. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, unused to being given terms. Are you negotiating with me? I am setting my boundaries, Grace replied. That is not negotiable. They stared at each other for a tense moment. Then Nathaniel let out a short laugh. You are different, he said. Fine. I agree to your conditions. You will have full authority. He held out his hand. Do we have a deal, Miss Mitchell? Grace looked at his hand. It was the hand of a man feared throughout the city. But it was also her one chance to save her family. A chance that would not come again. She took his hand. We have a deal, Mr. Blackwood. His grip was firm and steady. In that moment, she felt a door open to a future she could not see. Call me Nathaniel, he said. Grace nodded. Then you can call me Grace. Her first 2 weeks at the Sterling were the hardest of her life. The staff watched her with suspicion. They whispered about the video, guessing she was Nathaniel's lover, or a tool he was using against his mother. Grace ignored the rumors. She focused on her work, treating everyone with respect, from the head chef to the dishwasher. She met with each employee. She learned their names and listened to their problems. She adjusted schedules for parents and improved the staff meals. Most importantly, she protected them. One night, a rich, drunk man screamed at a young server because his food was 2 minutes late. Grace calmly walked over and asked the man to leave. He threatened to call Nathaniel Blackwood. Grace smiled and told him to go right ahead, then showed him the door herself. That story spread quickly. After that, the staff's attitude changed. They saw her as a true leader, someone who would defend them. The Sterling's revenue began to climb. Happy employees provided better service, and satisfied customers returned. 5-star reviews appeared online, praising the food and the warm atmosphere. Nathaniel started visiting more often. At first, he claimed he was checking on business, watching from his corner table with a glass of whiskey. But soon, his visits grew longer. The business checks turned into conversations. They usually talked after the restaurant closed. Grace would have coffee, and Nathaniel would have his whiskey. They sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. They talked about work and life. He asked about Noah and her parents, and the debt she was trying to pay. She asked about his family's empire and the loneliness she saw behind his cold exterior. Nathaniel was surprised that Grace was never afraid of him. She spoke her mind. If he was wrong, she said so. One day, he threatened a partner who rejected a deal. Grace looked him in the eye. People can say no, she said. Even to you. A good leader listens to different ideas. They do not punish them. Anyone else would have been fired, but Nathaniel just listened. You are right, he finally said. It was the first time he had ever admitted fault to anyone. Marcus Chen watched from the corner, stunned. For 10 years, he had seen his boss destroy his enemies. He had never seen him listen. He had never seen him laugh. Grace Mitchell was different. She was reaching the man behind the cold mask. Marcus did not know if this was good or bad. He only knew that things were changing. And when Nathaniel Blackwood changed, the entire city had to change with him. One Friday, Noah appeared at the restaurant. Grace was checking reservations when her 14-year-old brother walked in, wearing his backpack. "I came to get you," Noah said with a smile. "My exam finished early." Grace started toward him for a hug. Then she saw Nathaniel at his corner table. His gray eyes were watching Noah with curiosity. Noah saw the strange man too. He stopped and moved closer to his sister, instantly on guard. "Who is that?" he whispered. Grace took a breath. "This is Nathaniel Blackwood, the owner," she explained. "And this is my brother, Noah." Noah's eyes grew wide. He knew this was the son of the woman from the video. He stared at Nathaniel, ready to protect his sister. But Nathaniel did not look threatening. He stood and walked toward them. His expression seemed softer. "So this is the brother Grace talks about," he said. "She told me you want to be a doctor." Noah paused, studying the man. Then he lifted his chin, showing courage beyond his 14 years. "Yes, I want to be a doctor to help people like my mom. To help people who cannot afford proper care." A flicker of something crossed Nathaniel's cold eyes as he tilted his head. "A noble ambition," he said. "And your grades?" "I am first in my class," Noah said simply. "I have a partial scholarship now and will earn a full one for college. My sister will not have to worry." Pride swelled in Grace's chest. Her brother had grown up so fast in the last 3 years. He carried so much loss, but never lost his hope. Nathaniel watched them both, then looked at Grace. "You should take your brother home," he stated. "We have nothing more to discuss." Grace nodded and led Noah out. On the way home, Noah was quiet for a long time. "The way he looks at you is different," he finally said. "Different how?" Grace asked. "I do not know how to say it," Noah admitted. "But I have never seen a man look at you like that. Like you are the most valuable thing in the room." Grace's cheeks burned in the darkness, but she said nothing. A week later, Noah ran home, his face in shock. "Grace!" he yelled. "The school called me in. Someone paid my entire tuition through graduation. They would not say who. I can just focus on my studies now." Grace knew at once who it was. That night, she waited at the Sterling. When Nathaniel arrived, she brought him his drink and sat down. "Why did you do that?" she asked directly. Nathaniel did not pretend to misunderstand. "The boy deserves a chance," he said, "and I could afford it." "I do not need your charity," Grace said, her voice sharp. "It is not charity," Nathaniel replied, his eyes meeting hers. "It is an investment. I invest in people who will do great things. Noah will be a fine doctor." Grace wanted to refuse, but the sincerity in his gray eyes silenced her. She saw no pity, just belief. "Thank you," she finally whispered. The words held everything else she could not say. They talked for the rest of the night. Nathaniel spoke of his father, the man who built the Blackwood Empire, but taught him that emotion was a flaw. "He never once hugged me," Nathaniel said softly. "He never said he loved me. Only lessons on power. When he died, I felt nothing but the duty to take his place." Grace told him about her own parents, the happy years before her mother got sick, the long nights spent in the hospital, the car crash that took them both in an instant. She told him about the scar on her wrist, a mark from a past she had to escape. As she pulled back her sleeve, Nathaniel's eyes grew dark. "Where is he?" he asked, his voice like ice. "You do not need to know," Grace answered. "It is over now. I survived." Nathaniel said no more, but his finger traced the scar, a touch so gentle it surprised her. In that moment, Grace saw a tenderness she never thought he possessed. They talked until the sky turned from black to the soft colors of dawn. When they left, An invisible bond had formed between two lonely people. The news that Nathaniel had made Grace the manager of the Sterling eventually reached Eleanor. Sophia Harrington told her, having seen Grace running the restaurant during dinner. Sophia's voice dripped with poison over the phone. "Do you know what your son is doing? He hired that girl. He sees her almost every day. The entire city is talking." Eleanor nearly broke her phone. She had believed Nathaniel's interest was a passing phase, but making Grace a manager was an act she could not tolerate. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, the doors to the Sterling opened, and Eleanor Blackwood walked in. She was dressed in a severe black dress. Her platinum hair was perfectly styled. Her expensive heels clicked on the marble floor like a countdown. Grace was checking table settings when she saw her and froze. She knew that face from her nightmares. "So you are the little tramp who has my son under a spell," Eleanor announced. Her voice echoed, causing the staff to stop and stare. "I must admit, you are more clever than I thought. You went from throwing food to climbing into his bed." Heat rushed to Grace's face, but she controlled her anger. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said calmly, "please leave my restaurant." "Your restaurant?" Eleanor scoffed. "This belongs to the Blackwood family. You are just a waitress playing manager." A few employees gasped. Grace stepped forward, meeting Eleanor's stare without flinching. "I will say it again," Grace said, her voice steady. "Please leave. Now." Eleanor moved closer, her gaze turning vicious. "Who do you think you are?" she whispered. "Do you believe Nathaniel cares for you? He is using you to anger me. When he is done, you will have nothing. And I will make sure you and your brother never recover. I hear he wants to be a doctor. What a shame if that dream was crushed." Grace's blood ran cold at the mention of Noah. She could take any insult, but he was her line. "If you touch my brother," Grace said, her voice shaking with rage, "I swear to you." "What will you do?" Eleanor mocked. "Throw another plate?" The doors burst open. Nathaniel stood there, his face a mask of ice. Marcus was right behind him, having clearly called his boss. "Mother," Nathaniel said. The single word was a threat. Eleanor turned to him, her smile unchanged. "Nathaniel, perfect timing. I was just speaking with your employee." "Step outside with me," Nathaniel commanded. His tone left no room for argument. Eleanor gave Grace a final, hateful look before following her son. On the sidewalk, their argument erupted. "You crossed a line," Nathaniel said. "I warned you to leave her alone." "She is using you," Eleanor shrieked. "I am protecting you." "You are protecting your pride," he answered coldly. "Grace is not using me. She is the only person who has ever spoken to me without fear. The only one who sees a man, not a monster or a bank account." "Then what am I to you?" Eleanor demanded, her voice breaking. "You are the person who tried to control my life for 36 years, Nathaniel said. "You never cared what I wanted, only what you wanted me to be. Now that I have found something that matters, you want to ruin it." Eleanor was stunned, hearing those words from her son for the first time. Nathaniel moved closer. "Listen to me," he whispered with menace. "If you harm Grace or Noah, I will sever all ties. You will lose access to the family's wealth and influence. You know this is not an empty threat." For the first time, Eleanor saw unbending resolve in his eyes. This was not anger. It was a final decision. "You will regret this," she said, her confidence gone. "No," Nathaniel replied. "My only regret is not doing this sooner." He walked back into the restaurant, leaving her alone on the sidewalk. She realized she could actually lose him. Defeat was not something Eleanor accepted. Filled with rage, she went home. Her son had chosen a waitress over her. He had threatened his own mother. She sat in her mansion, drinking glass after glass. In her rage, she made a fatal choice. She called Viktor Volkov head of the rival Russian family. The Volkovs and the Blackwoods had been enemies for years. It was a long, cold war with both sides waiting for a chance to strike. "Victor," Eleanor slurred into the phone, "I have information. My son has a weakness. She gave him their names, a waitress called Grace Mitchell and her little brother. Nathaniel cares for them more than anything. They are your leverage. She did not consider the consequences of betraying her own son. She just wanted Grace gone. 3 days later, Noah vanished. He never came home from school. Grace called his phone over and over, but there was no answer. The school said he left at 3 in the afternoon. His friends had not seen him. An hour passed, then 2. Panic began to build inside her. At 8 that night, her phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo that made her blood run cold. Noah was tied to a chair, tape covering his mouth, his eyes filled with terror. The text below read, "Tell your lover we need to talk. Call the police, and the boy dies." Grace fell to the floor, her legs giving out. She could not cry or scream. She just trembled, staring at the picture. For the first time since her parents died, she felt completely helpless. Her hands shook as she dialed Nathaniel's number. He answered on the first ring. "Grace," he said, his voice instantly full of worry when he heard her frantic breathing. "What is wrong?" "Noah," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They have Noah. They sent me a picture. I do not know what to do, Nathaniel. Please help me." "Where are you?" he asked, his tone hardening to steel. "At home." "Stay there. I am coming." He ended the call and looked at Marcus, his second in command. The usual calm in Nathaniel's eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, violent rage. "Volkov," Nathaniel said. It was the only word needed. Marcus nodded. He knew only their rivals would be so reckless. "Mobilize everyone," Nathaniel commanded. "Find him in 1 hour. Pay whatever it takes. Tell the men to be ready. There will be a fight tonight." Marcus began making calls. Within 15 minutes, the entire Blackwood organization was active. Men gathered from across the city. Weapons were distributed. This was not business. This was war. Nathaniel arrived at Grace's apartment and found her on the floor, staring at Noah's picture. He knelt before her and held her shoulders. "Grace, look at me," Nathaniel said, his voice firm but gentle. "I will bring Noah back. I promise you, no one touches what is mine." Grace looked up, her eyes terrified. "I cannot lose him," she whispered. "He is all I have. I will not survive if something happens to him." "You will not lose him," Nathaniel swore, his voice like iron. "I would burn down this city first." Marcus's phone rang. He listened, then looked at Nathaniel. "We have them," Marcus reported. "An old warehouse on the Brooklyn docks. At least 10 guards." Nathaniel stood, his face a mask of death. Tonight, he would show the Volkov family why you never touched the people he protected. Midnight had consumed the Brooklyn docks. The abandoned warehouse stood at the end of a pier. A line of black cars stopped 300 meters away. Nathaniel got out, dressed in a black suit. Marcus handed him a gun. He checked it and tucked it away. 12 men, Marcus said quietly. 4 outside, 8 inside. "The boy is on the 2nd floor." Nathaniel nodded. "I want one alive to answer questions," he said, his voice flat. "The rest are disposable." 20 of Blackwood's men moved like shadows, surrounding the warehouse. The 4 guards outside were eliminated in silence. Nathaniel kicked the main door from its hinges and entered the building. Gunfire erupted. He moved with a terrifying calm, dropping his targets with perfect shots. He was not just a businessman, he was a killer, forged by his father to protect what belonged to him without mercy. The fight lasted under 10 minutes. 8 men lay dead on the floor. 1 was left alive, wounded and captured for interrogation. Nathaniel went up the stairs. He kicked open the door and saw Noah. The boy was tied to the chair, just like in the photo. His eyes widened in relief when he saw Nathaniel. Nathaniel walked over and gently removed the tape from Noah's mouth, then cut the ropes. "Are you hurt?" Nathaniel asked, his voice now soft. "I am okay," Noah said, his voice shaking. "They did not hurt me. They just made threats." "Where is Grace?" "She is safe," Nathaniel said. "She is waiting for you at home." Nathaniel pulled the boy to his feet. Noah collapsed against him, his small body trembling. "I tried to be brave," he whispered, "but I thought they would kill me." Nathaniel froze for a second, unfamiliar with being held. He then placed a steady hand on Noah's back. "You are safe now," he said. "I promise." After Marcus drove Noah back to Grace, Nathaniel turned to the last man alive. His gray eyes were cold. "Who told you about them?" The man spat blood. "I know nothing." Nathaniel produced a knife and rested the blade on the man's smallest finger. "I will ask again," he said softly. "For every wrong answer, I take a finger." Fear bloomed in the man's eyes. He saw there was no bluff. "A woman!" he screamed. "She called the boss, Vulov. She said she was your mother." Nathaniel went numb. His own mother had given the enemy information to kidnap a 14-year-old boy. "What did she say?" His voice was a hollow echo. "She called them your weakness," the man stammered. "A waitress and her brother. She said it was the only way to get leverage." Nathaniel stood and walked out of the building, leaving the man to his fate. He breathed the cold Brooklyn air and felt something inside him break. He knew his mother was cruel and selfish, but he never imagined this. She would let a child die to punish a girl who bruised her pride. He took out his phone and called the family lawyer. "Do what we discussed last week," Nathaniel said, his voice flat. "Cut my mother off completely. Freeze her accounts. Cancel every card. Make sure she never touches another dollar of Blackwood money." The lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, are you certain?" "She is not my mother," Nathaniel replied. "As of tonight, Eleanor Blackwood is dead to me." When the car returned to the apartment, Grace was already at the door. She threw her arms around Noah, holding him so tightly he could not breathe. She held him and cried, her body shaking with relief. "I'm okay," Noah whispered. "Nathaniel saved me." Grace looked up at Nathaniel. He stood a few feet away, his suit stained with blood. His face was exhausted, but his eyes were soft as he watched them. Grace let go of her brother. She walked to Nathaniel and hugged him without a word. He stood rigid for a moment before his arms wrapped around her, holding her as if she might vanish. They stood in the cold night, two survivors holding on. "Thank you," Grace whispered into his chest, "for saving Noah, for keeping your word." He just held her closer. He tilted her chin up and looked into her tear-stained eyes. "I do not know what I would have done if I lost you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have lived 36 years without caring for anyone. Now I cannot imagine a life without you in it." Grace saw a new warmth in his gray eyes. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a soft, gentle kiss, a promise between two lonely people who had finally found home. Noah watched from the doorway with a smile before quietly slipping inside. A year passed. Grace and Nathaniel were together, keeping their relationship private. Nathaniel bought a larger, safer apartment for Grace and Noah. Grace fought him on it, but he insisted it was for Noah's protection. The Sterling became one of New York's top restaurants under Grace's leadership. Eleanor, however, entered a personal hell. When Nathaniel cut her off, the news spread through high society. Everyone heard she had betrayed her son. Her wealthy friends vanished. Sophia Harrington was the first to pretend she never knew her. Exclusive clubs revoked her membership. The party invitations stopped coming. Eleanor was alone in her huge, empty mansion, forced to fire most of her staff. Her personal savings were not enough to support her old life. On long nights, she looked at photos of Nathaniel as a boy and wondered where it all went wrong. After 6 months of alcohol and misery, she finally sought therapy. She did it out of loneliness. But the sessions opened old wounds. She talked about a cold mother who demanded perfection and a loveless marriage. She saw how her fear of being abandoned made her need to control everyone. She realized she had treated Nathaniel just as her mother had treated her. That poison had ruined the only relationship that mattered. Change was slow and painful for Eleanor. She learned to accept her own faults. She understood that status did not give her the right to hurt people. After a year, she did the hardest thing. She asked to see Grace to apologize. She sent a letter to the Sterling asking for just 10 minutes. Grace was torn. The woman had nearly gotten Noah killed. But she remembered her mother's words. Forgiveness frees you from hate. She met Eleanor at a small cafe. The woman who walked in was a ghost of her former self. She was thin and gray, her eyes filled with regret. "Thank you for meeting me," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "I know I do not deserve it, but I am sorry. For everything. For humiliating you, for threatening you, and for what I did to Noah. I do not expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I am trying to be better." For the first time, Grace did not see an enemy. She saw a broken woman trying to piece her life back together. 5 years after that night at the Monarch, Grace Blackwood sat in the black Maybach. She watched the restaurant appear through the window. This was where it all began. She was not the worried 27-year-old waitress anymore. She was Nathaniel's wife and a respected businesswoman. Nathaniel opened her door and took her hand. His gray eyes were always warm for her now. A platinum wedding band shone on his finger. Noah got out next. He was a tall 19-year-old, a medical student at Columbia. He was living his dream. Grace knew their parents were watching, proud. The last person to exit was Eleanor Blackwood. At 70 years old, her hair was silver. Her face was much softer than it used to be. After 4 years of therapy and helping other women, she was slowly rejoining the family. Richard Porter, still the manager, almost fainted when he saw Grace. "Mrs. Blackwood," he stammered. "It is an honor." Grace smiled. "A table for 4, Mr. Porter." They sat at the same table Eleanor had used 7 years ago. Grace looked around the dining room. She remembered the long nights and her aching feet. She remembered lifting that plate of salmon and changing her whole life. "To think all of this started with a plate of food on my head," Eleanor said, a hint of irony in her voice. The table filled with laughter. 5 years ago, Grace would have wanted to do it again. But people can truly change, and Eleanor was living proof. Noah lifted his glass to Grace. "You taught me that dignity is the one thing a person must never lose. It cannot be taken, and it should never be given away." Grace felt a familiar sting in her eyes. She held Nathaniel's hand on one side and Noah's on the other, looking at the woman across the table. This was her family, built from ruin and healed by forgiveness. Nathaniel raised his glass. "To second chances," he offered, "and the courage to change." Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright. "And to the kindness that makes those chances possible," she added, her gaze full of gratitude for Grace. As their glasses touched, Grace stared at the deep red of the wine. It brought back the memory of her dress, 7 years ago, stained with that same color from an act of pure cruelty. Life truly worked in strange ways, turning the darkest nights into the start of a brand new day. Sometimes, the person you believe is your enemy becomes your family. That is the essence of Grace Mitchell's story. She was a waitress who refused to surrender her dignity to wealth and power, and in the end, she earned the happiness she deserved. This story reminds us that self-respect is not for sale, that people can transform themselves if they truly try, and that life offers new beginnings to those who are brave enough to take them. How did this story make you feel? Was there ever a time you had to fight for your self-respect? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments. We love hearing from you. If you found this story meaningful, please like it, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. We wish you and your family health and peace. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.